A year after we got married, I found out I was pregnant. My husband spoiled me like an absolute princess, and my parents-in-law explicitly told everyone I was the greatest blessing to their family. I always thought I was incredibly lucky to have married into such a kind-hearted household. It was not until an unexpected incident that I realized this entire life was a massive lie. Ever since I got pregnant, I had been lethargic. I could easily sleep for a dozen hours a day. One night, probably because I drank too much water during the day, I woke up with an urgent need to use the bathroom. But when I turned on the bedside lamp, I realized my husband, Julian, was not in bed. I tried calling his name a few times, but the house was dead silent. Glancing at my phone, I saw it was past 1 in the morning. Where could he have gone? Though I felt a bit strange about it, I did not overthink it. After using the bathroom, I got back into bed to sleep. However, with Julian missing, I tossed and turned. Deep into the night, while I was half asleep, I suddenly felt the mattress dip. At the same time, the distinct, sweet scent of peach blossom perfume drifted past my nose. I was wide awake in an instant, my heart dropping to my stomach. Could Julian be seeing another woman? I quickly dismissed the thought. Julian simply was not that kind of guy. Maybe he had a late-night errand. But how could I explain the women's perfume on his clothes? My mind raced, but eventually exhaustion took over, and I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I asked Julian why he was not in bed when I woke up. He paused for a fraction of a second before explaining that a colleague needed a crucial physical contract for a corporate merger, so he had to drive over and drop it off in the middle of the night. His explanation sounded plausible, but a lingering sense of unease settled in my chest. I started paying closer attention and noticed Julian had indeed been acting strange lately. He was coming home from the office later and later. Every time he got back, he spent an unusually long time in the bathroom. Sure, people joke that the bathroom is a man's sanctuary, but he was in there far too often. More importantly, whenever I walked near him, he would rapidly minimize whatever was on his laptop or phone screen. Combining this with the perfume incident, I knew something shady was going on. So, taking advantage of a moment when Julian went to shower and left his phone on the nightstand, I secretly snooped through it. I found absolutely nothing. Was I just misunderstanding him? Still, my gut told me something was terribly wrong. Then came a day when Julian told me he had to work late. When he finally got home, I smelled that same sweet peach scent on him again. It was faint, as if he had already showered to wash it off, but I have a naturally sharp sense of smell. This time, I finally caught my break. He had left his iMessage app open on his MacBook. I clearly saw a pinned text thread at the very top of his messages. The contact name was saved as Baby Bunny. Inside, there was a brief exchange. Baby Bunny wrote that she felt like she was going crazy. Julian had replied, telling her to hold on just a little longer, and that he would come see her the second he got off work. I reached out to scroll up through the chat history, but the iMessage app suddenly disconnected from the cloud. I knew immediately that Julian had done something on his phone in the bathroom to cut the connection. He was always a cautious man. His only slip-up this time was assuming I would not touch his laptop, as I usually avoided screens late in my pregnancy to rest my eyes. My mind turned into a buzzing hive of static. Julian was cheating on me. Once that reality set in, tears began streaming down my face. I could not even articulate what I was feeling, just a sour, bitter agony tearing at my chest. This was not my first time dealing with this kind of trauma. 10 years ago, my mother faced the exact same nightmare. My dad became obsessed with a woman he met outside our home and ruthlessly demanded a divorce. When my mom refused, he just packed his bags and moved in with the mistress. He turned our entire family life into a chaotic war zone. Eventually, my mom had no choice but to agree to the divorce. She asked for nothing but full custody of me. My dad was thrilled to oblige. Since then, my mom and I had depended solely on each other. Now, I had finally gotten married, I was pregnant, and my in-laws treated me beautifully. I truly believed I was one of the lucky ones, only to find out it was all a massive illusion. Was every kind thing Julian ever did for me totally fake? I cried for an entire day, my eyes swollen like golf balls. When Julian walked through the front door, this was the state he found me in. He froze, rushing over to ask what was wrong and if something terrible had happened. I pointed at the living room television and lied, saying I had just watched a heartbreaking drama movie. I told him the female lead was so pitiful it made my chest physically ache, and I just could not stop crying. Julian let out a massive sigh of relief and pulled me into his arms. He teased me for being overly sentimental, reminding me that movies are all fake and just designed to make emotional girls cry. He then told me to go wash my face, saying he had brought me cupcakes from that boutique bakery downtown. His voice was incredibly gentle, yet my heart tasted like ash. If I had not seen his text messages that morning, I would have died before believing he was capable of such betrayal. Just picturing him out there, doing those intimate things with another woman, made me so nauseous I could not eat a single bite. Julian even asked why my morning sickness had suddenly gotten so severe again, and I just gave him a vague excuse to brush him off. I knew I needed to plan my next move. At the very least, I had to find out who this other woman was. The next morning, Julian left for work bright and early. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I got dressed and followed him toward the downtown business district. Ever since I got pregnant, Julian had convinced me to quit my corporate job. He insisted his salary was more than enough to support our family, and that I shouldn't have to deal with workplace stress. Because of that, I had plenty of free time. I tailed Julian for several days in a row but found nothing abnormal. His routine was incredibly predictable, just commuting between the office and home. Anyone looking at him would praise him as the perfect American husband. That is, until a week later, when Julian texted me saying he would be stuck at the office late. I sat in my car and watched him drive straight to a luxury boutique hotel. I waited near that hotel for hours. Just when my patience was completely worn out, Julian finally walked through the revolving doors. Walking right beside him was a pale, slender woman wearing a floral sundress and a sun hat. Her arm was tightly looped through his, and they looked incredibly intimate. A breeze swept by, messing up the woman's hair. Julian reached out with tender affection and tucked the loose strands behind her ear. That gentle gesture made my entire body violently tremble. The worst part was that I knew who she was. When Julian and I got married, that exact woman had been sitting in the audience, staring unblinkingly at us on the altar. I had found her behavior strange at the time and even asked Julian about it. He told me her name was Serena, an old college classmate of his who worked as a romance author. He claimed she was just a highly sensitive artist who was moved to tears by seeing us so happy. I was so touched by that explanation that I had happily walked over and offered her a toast. She drank the champagne and cried, telling me she hoped we would be happy forever. Looking back now, she was not crying tears of blessing. She was crying because Julian was marrying me. I hardly knew any of Julian's friends, as he rarely took me to his social gatherings, so digging up information from his social circle was impossible. Instead, I used an anonymous online account to casually message one of his mutuals, eventually discovering Serena's pen name. I searched her up on the internet. Surprisingly, she had a massive digital footprint. She was a fairly popular indie romance author on Amazon and BookTok, having published 5 novels. I looked through her catalog. Most of her books fell into the sentimental billionaire romance genre. Her writing was highly emotional. Her most recent release was about a college romance. The female lead was a delicate, sensitive novelist, and the male lead came from a traditional, conservative family where both parents were strict government workers. This perfectly mirrored Julian's real-life family background. In her novel, the couple was forced apart after graduation because the man's parents objected to their relationship, but they always kept each other in their hearts. Later in the story, the male lead married another woman, but that wife tragically died in childbirth, leaving behind a baby. The two true lovers were then finally able to reunite and raise the child together. I instantly knew this was Serena and Julian's real story disguised as fiction. My role in this sick fantasy was obviously the doomed, disposable wife. The realization made me physically sick. She painted herself as an innocent, pure-hearted victim, while I was implicitly the wicked interloper stealing her man, whose ultimate destiny was to die in labor. It was completely unhinged. Following the breadcrumbs from her official author fan groups, I eventually tracked down Serena's private, locked X account. On this secret timeline, she documented everything. Her first post from a few years ago bragged about how incredibly well her boyfriend treated her. After they moved in together, he never let her do a single chore. He peeled all her fruit for her, always handed her water bottles with the caps already unscrewed, and supported her unconditionally wherever she wanted to go. A later post detailed their tragic breakup. She revealed she had a weak constitution and a congenital heart defect, making it impossible for her to safely carry a child. Her boyfriend's family was prominent and traditional, and he was the sole heir, expected to manage the family's extensive business holdings and uphold their public image. A subsequent post announced that she had gotten married to someone else, but her most recent posts revealed she was back together with her ex. She referred to him as Mr. Hayes. She wrote that Miss Hayes's wife was pregnant, and he had promised that as soon as the baby was born, he would divorce the wife and marry her. She admitted that she sometimes got extremely jealous and would intentionally leave hickeys or perfume on him, but she was forcing herself to endure it because the baby growing in that woman's belly belonged to her and Mr. Hayes. She wrote that the woman was just a vessel acting as her surrogate and that the baby would call her mom in the future. Reading those posts left me shivering uncontrollably, my heart turning to solid ice. In my wildest nightmares, I never could have imagined that my marriage to Julian was a premeditated scam from day one. He never loved me. He just saw me as a stepping stone in their twisted love story. All his daily acts of pampering were solely directed at the incubator carrying his child. He had clearly planned to manufacture a reason to divorce me the moment the baby was born, take full custody, and marry his college sweetheart. My teeth ground together so hard my jaw ached. I used to believe Julian was my savior, the man who pulled me out of my dark past. I loved him so much I listened to whatever he said. Now, I realized our entire relationship might have been a calculated trap. Back when we met at the corporate firm, I was just an intern assigned to his team. Because I grew up poor in a rural town, I lacked self-esteem. I did not even dare to speak up when senior coworkers pushed their busy work onto me. Julian was the only one who defended me. Over time, I fell deeply in love with him. Then he confessed his feelings, and we got married shortly after. I was probably targeted from the very beginning. A timid, country-raised girl with no powerful family backing, who was too scared to speak up when treated unfairly, who could possibly make a better, more disposable tool than me? But even a cornered rabbit will bite. Did he really think I was that easy to destroy? He clearly did not know how miserably my cheating father ended up after abandoning my mother. I am not a saint, and the thing I hate most in this world is betrayal. The shock of uncovering the massive conspiracy caused me to collapse. I spiked a 102-degree fever. Julian paced around the bedroom in a frantic panic. If I had not already discovered his true colors, I would have fallen right back into the illusion of his deep concern. With a raspy voice, I begged him to get me some strong fever medication. Julian looked deeply conflicted, softly explaining that pregnant women cannot take strong medicine because it could harm the baby. Just as I suspected, the only thing he actually cared about was the fetus. I closed my eyes and stopped talking. Terrified that a high fever would cook the baby, Julian stayed up all night, wiping me down with rubbing alcohol to lower my temperature. By the next morning, my fever finally broke. Julian had dark, heavy bags under his eyes, looking genuinely haggard. His voice was hoarse as he said he was so relieved I was better. He then mentioned a friend had just called, so he needed to run out for a bit, but promised to bring back good food for me to rest and recover. I stared coldly as Julian showered, groomed himself perfectly, and drove off. At the exact same time, I checked Serena's secret account. She was complaining online about how pregnant women are so dramatic and needy, monopolizing men's time. She wrote that since her boyfriend had spent the entire night nursing that woman, it was only fair that he spend the whole day making it up to her today. Fair? What the hell is fair? Even if they made vows to each other years ago, I am the legal wife. She is nothing but a homewrecker. What right did she have to complain? I swore I would not let this mistress get away with it, and I would make Julian, the architect of this nightmare, pay an even heavier price. After Julian left, I tried to get out of bed to take a shower. But the moment I stepped out of the bedroom, a wave of profound weakness hit me. My legs gave out, and I crashed hard onto the hardwood floor. An agonizing pain in warm fluid rushing down my legs. I instantly knew I was going into premature labor. Dragging my body across the floor, I grabbed my cell phone and dialed Julian's number. I called him 5 times. He rejected every single one, and on the 6th try, his phone was turned off completely. With no other options, I called my mom. When I woke up, I was in a room at Chicago Med. I had given birth to a set of twins, an older boy and a younger girl. Because they were premature, they were incredibly fragile and hooked up to monitors in the NICU. By this time, Julian and his parents had rushed to the hospital. Julian stood by my bed like a scolded child, keeping his head down while desperately apologizing to my mother. Because of my life-threatening emergency, my mom was absolutely furious at Julian for being unreachable. She screamed at him, demanding to know how he could leave a heavily pregnant woman alone in a house right after she had a high fever. She told him that even if he had the most important business emergency on Earth, he had no excuse to turn off his phone. If she had not gotten there in time, both I and the babies would have died. My parents-in-law obviously knew Julian was entirely in the wrong, so they aggressively scolded him too. Knowing he had messed up big time, Julian kept his head bowed in shame. He tried to step forward to apologize to me, but I simply turned my face to the wall and ignored him. His hair was a mess, he had stubble on his chin, and his shirt was wrinkled. As he leaned in, I caught the faint, undeniable scent of that peach perfume. Looking at him made me feel physically contaminated. It was blatantly obvious what he was busy doing while I was bleeding out on the floor calling for help. I might have eventually forgiven him for hurting me, but his actions nearly killed my children. He had crossed a line I could never ignore. Naturally, Julian and his parents assumed I was just giving him the silent treatment out of standard marital anger. This Cold War lasted through my entire hospital stay until I was discharged to go home. Worried that I wouldn't get adequate care and wanting to avoid any mother-in-law tension, both sets of parents agreed to hire 2 professional night nurses and an infant care specialist for the first 2 months, while Julian was tasked with waiting on me hand and foot to mend our relationship. After a month of premium care from the medical nurses, my health bounced back. The twins were thriving. My son, Miles, was energetic, and my daughter, Hazel, was sweet and quiet. Both babies were growing delightfully chubby. To show my gratitude, I gave the head night nurse a very generous cash bonus. During this time, Julian put on the performance of a lifetime. Playing the role of the devoted new father, he acted like he wanted to be glued to the bassinets 24 hours a day, constantly trying to get cooing over the bassinets, talking to them as if they could already call him daddy. Whenever I watched this domestic scene, my heart ached bitterly. If Julian had not been cheating, our lives really would have been this perfect. But I refused to let his facade blind me. I knew that toxic couple was actively plotting to kick me out of my own home. I needed to use this postpartum recovery period to regain my strength and carefully plot my counterattack. Once the babies passed the 1-month mark, Julian's friends occasionally dropped by with gifts. I welcomed them graciously, as they were genuinely coming to offer good wishes. Until one afternoon, Serena showed up. She walked in with a radiant, beaming smile, holding several high-end shopping bags that she claimed were gifts for the babies. It was obvious she had not warned Julian she was coming, because the exact second he laid eyes on her, his entire body went rigid. Oh, this was going to be fun. Honey, hurry up and take those heavy bags from her hands. You can't let our guest do the heavy lifting, I chirped, wrapping both my arms tightly around Julian's waist and using a sickly sweet doting tone that even made me want to gag. Serena's face immediately fell. She forced her expression to recover and sourly remarked, "You two seem to have such a wonderful relationship. It's truly enviable." As she spoke, her eyes darted toward Julian, shooting him a resentful glare. Julian looked like a deer in headlights, stiffly walking into the nursery with the bags. The two of them were making secret, dramatic eye contact right in front of me, terrified I might catch on to their affair. Serena hovered over the cribs, looking genuinely affectionate toward the babies. Of course she was. She probably thought she was just biding her time until she could step in as their ready-made mother without enduring the pain of pregnancy. When she heard I named my daughter Hazel, she actually frowned and had the audacity to say the name was too common and lacked artistic creativity. I rolled my eyes. What right did she have to an opinion? Serena was clearly in an agitated state. After a few minutes, she suddenly blurted out, "IVF really is a miracle of science, isn't it? Getting a boy and a girl on the very first try without having to suffer through it twice." I feigned total shock. IVF? Who on earth told you we used IVF? What a crazy rumor. We conceived completely naturally. Serena froze in place. Julian, walking back into the room, also froze. The atmosphere instantly turned suffocatingly awkward. Suddenly, a terrifying puzzle piece clicked into place in my mind. I remembered that for a long time after we got married, I didn't get pregnant. Julian had practically dragged me to a private fertility clinic owned by one of his medical fraternity brothers for testing. The doctor heavily pushed us to undergo IVF, and Julian pressured me relentlessly to agree. But because I felt perfectly healthy, I adamantly refused and chose to focus on my diet and vitamins instead. I eventually got pregnant naturally. If I had caved to Julian's pressure back then, I would have literally become their biological surrogate. Serena's embryo would have been secretly implanted into my uterus without my knowledge. That was exactly why Serena had boasted on her secret blog that the child I was carrying belonged to her and Julian. My God. They were vastly more psychotic and evil than I had ever imagined. Between the three of us standing in that room, it was hard to tell whose face was paler. Mine, living in a horror movie. Serena's, realizing she had been lied to about the baby's biology, or Julian's, having been caught manipulating both of us. When Serena finally left, she looked physically ill, swaying as she walked. She was naturally frail, and this massive emotional blow made her look tragically fragile. Julian's eyes were practically brimming with agonizing heartbreak for her. I clenched my jaw, using every ounce of my willpower to suppress my roaring hatred. As Serena walked down our front porch steps, she stumbled. Julian instinctively lunged forward and grabbed her arm, crying out, "Careful!" I watched them coldly from the doorway and called out in a breezy voice, "We're hosting the twins' sip and see party next Wednesday. You absolutely must come, Serena." Serena turned around, her deep, striking eyes shimmering with unshed tears. With a stubborn, melodramatic defiance, she replied, "I will certainly be there." That very night, Julian manufactured a weak excuse and left the house. The night nurse gave me a sympathetic, hesitant look, indirectly hinting that she noticed something was off. It was pathetic, even the hired help could see what was happening. They were carrying on their affair right under my nose. Did they really think they could bully me like this? Later that night, I checked Serena's secret account. She had posted a massive rant. She and her Mr. Hayes had just had their most explosive fight ever. She was devastated because he had been lying to her. She had believed the children I birthed were biologically hers, only to discover Julian had lied to keep her placated, and the twins were fully mine and his. She wrote that she felt betrayed by the universe. Reading it, I wanted to scream at my phone. She was still playing the innocent victim. When she was planning to hijack my womb, did she ever consider my humanity? No matter how pretty she looked on the outside, her soul was rotten to the core. When Julian returned home, he looked completely dead inside. He locked himself in the bathroom for an hour, and when he finally came out, he reeked of stale cigarette smoke. He was clearly severely depressed. I pretended to notice nothing, and banished him to sleep in the guest bedroom, claiming I didn't want the smell of smoke near the babies. I saw the light under the guest room door stay on until dawn, but I slept like a rock. Soon enough, it was Wednesday, the day of the welcome baby party. We hosted a lavish catered event at our home. My parents-in-law invited everyone of status they knew, including Julian's extended family, his corporate colleagues, and their country club friends. Naturally, Serena attended. She arrived early and sat at a table with Julian's friends, looking remarkably frail and depressed, which only amplified her delicate aesthetic. I do not think Julian expected her to actually show up. He looked visibly stunned when he saw her. He kept stealing worried glances at her table, but she stubbornly refused to look at him. They were clearly still locked in their lover's quarrel, and she was likely there just to punish him. I couldn't care less about their toxic dynamic. I was just thrilled she came. If she had stayed home, my grand finale would have been ruined. Interestingly, I noticed Julian's parents looked highly alarmed to see Serena. His father, Robert, instantly scowled. I suspected there was some deep family lore there that I wasn't privy to yet. At the height of the catered luncheon, the hired MC handed me the microphone to share a few words as a new mother. I stood at the front of the room, gave a polite speech about the trials of pregnancy and the profound joy of motherhood. Then, my tone shifted. Actually, there are a few things I'd like to share with everyone here today. At the height of the catered luncheon, as laughter and soft music filled our home, I excused myself, claiming I needed to check on the twins. But instead of going to the nursery, I slipped into my home office at the end of the hall and quietly closed the door. With chilling composure, I opened a burner laptop. I had already created an anonymous, encrypted email address and prepared a digital package of evidence. The high-definition photos of Julian and Serena, screenshots of her unhinged diary posts, and the damning audio file of Julian confessing his love and his divorce plans. I sent the email to 3 strategic targets: the board of directors and the CEO at Julian's firm, with the subject line, "A concern regarding senior employee conduct." Serena's publisher and literary agent, with the subject line, "Information regarding your author, Serena." A prominent Chicago society blogger known for delicately breaking scandals among the city's elite. After hitting send, I wiped the laptop and walked back into the party, smiling at my guests as if nothing had happened. I didn't need a loud, vulgar scene. I had just planted digital poison. I knew the powerful networks I had targeted would do the work for me. The storm wouldn't be a sudden explosion. It would be a slow, creeping tide of whispers and closed-door phone calls, culminating in their inevitable, quiet ruin. But I wasn't quite finished. Before leaving the office, I bypassed the DJ's playlist, and synced the audio file directly to our home's surround sound system. I walked back into the party, smiling at my guests as if nothing had happened. Suddenly, the music cut out. Serena's sobbing voice echoed through the surround sound speakers. Why? Why have you been lying to me? Did you fall in love with her? Then, Julian's desperate, pleading voice. No, Serena, you're the only one I love. I'm only with her for the babies. You have to believe me. Once the babies are off breast milk, I swear I'm filing for divorce. We'll get married. We'll be together forever. The entire party was paralyzed in shock. Julian, his parents, and Serena all stood frozen like statues. Serena clearly had no idea I had discovered their affair, let alone that I would publicly execute them in front of their entire social circle. She jumped up like a startled rabbit, her arm catching the edge of her plate, sending it shattering onto the floor, drawing every single eyeball in the house directly to her. My mom, Martha, was the first to snap out of the shock. She charged across the room like a linebacker and slapped Julian across the face so hard his head snapped to the side. Before anyone could react, she lunged at Serena to hit her too. Julian threw his body over Serena to shield her, and Serena collapsed into his arms, sobbing hysterically. The party erupted into absolute chaos. But I didn't care. Julian and Serena's reputations were incinerated. Whether they ended up together or not, they would spend the rest of their lives drowning in vicious gossip. They would never be able to hold their heads up in polite society again. The baby celebration ended in a massive, ugly scandal. The people who were the most furious were Julian's parents. In the aftermath, I finally learned the truth about why they hated Serena. Years ago, Robert and Susan Hayes had violently opposed Julian dating Serena, not just because of her health issues, but because they had run a private background check on her. They discovered Serena's family background was riddled with financial instability and public scandals, stemming from her mother's history. They saw her as a significant liability to the Hayes family's reputation and fortune. To a wealthy, traditional family obsessed with their pristine public image, letting the daughter of a homewrecker marry their only son was a complete impossibility. Robert Hayes' face was purple with rage. You end it with that woman right this second. You are never to see her again. Julian stubbornly jutted out his chin. Dad, Serena isn't just that woman. She is the love of my life. Susan, my mother-in-law, screamed and slapped her son again. Are you trying to put us in early graves? Julian refused to back down. He coldly told his parents that since he had given them their precious grandson to carry on the family name, he didn't owe them anything else. He announced he was packing his bags and moving out to live with Serena permanently. Susan wept bitterly, demanding to know how he could abandon his legal wife and his newborn infants for a mistress. Look at Chloe. She just gave birth to your children a month ago. What is she supposed to do now? Julian glanced at me with a fleeting look of guilt, but it vanished in a second, replaced by cold determination. Chloe, I know I've wronged you, but Serena and I are truly in love. You can take the kids. If you don't want them, Serena and I will raise them perfectly. He then laid out his terms. If I walked away and left the kids to him and Serena, he would give me a $1 million cash settlement. If I demanded custody, he would give me $500,000 and the deed to the suburban house we lived in. Honestly, I had thought this through. My marriage to Julian was irrevocably dead. A divorce was the only logical outcome. My primary goal now was to extract as much wealth from him as possible to secure my children's future. But I knew this was not the moment to negotiate, so I kept my mouth shut and watched them fight. Robert violently rejected Julian's proposal, screaming that if Julian wanted to run off with Serena, he would have to do it over his dead body. Julian tore at his own hair, completely having a meltdown. Eventually, the parents turned their fury toward me. Even though Julian was entirely at fault, he was still their golden boy. They scolded me, saying I was incredibly reckless and malicious for exposing family business in front of the entire country club. They said that if I had a grievance, I should have handled it behind closed doors, and that my actions had destroyed the family's dignity. Before I could even open my mouth, my mom exploded. She had been holding her rage in for 10 years since her own divorce. She pointed her finger right in my in-laws' faces. You people only care about your precious son. When did you ever consider my daughter? Your son treated her like a breeding dog. You expected her to just swallow this abuse in silence so you could save face? Did you want to drive her to suicide? I didn't raise my daughter just so your garbage son could trample all over her. We might not be old money, but Chloe is not a punching bag. If you don't give us a proper settlement today, I will make sure this goes to the press. Hearing my mom fiercely defend me made my tears spill over. For weeks, I had carried the crushing weight of this conspiracy entirely alone, terrified it would break me. If Julian and Serena hadn't been so relentlessly cruel, I wouldn't have dragged my mother into this mess. Faced with my mother's righteous fury, the Hayes parents had nothing left to say. After all, their son was the villain. To prevent Julian from running back to Serena, Robert essentially placed his grown son under house arrest, locking the doors and threatening him. Meanwhile, someone from the party had recorded the video of my presentation on their phone and uploaded it to TikTok and Twitter. The video went completely viral. The internet loves a scandal, and cybersleuths quickly doxed Julian and Serena. Julian was labeled a sociopathic narcissist, while Serena took the absolute worst of the backlash because she already had a public platform. BookTok turned on her instantly. Reviewers review-bombed her novels, calling her a manipulative, narcissistic homewrecker who wrote fake feminist books while actively abusing other women. Someone even dug up her birth records and exposed her mother's history as a mistress, leading the internet to declare that the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Because the idea of tricking a woman into being a non-consenting surrogate was so deeply horrifying, thousands of mothers online mobilized to destroy her. People started mailing boxes of garbage, dead flowers, and threatening letters to her apartment. This rapid escalation was beyond my expectations. My original goal was just to nuke their social standing in our local circle, not to trigger national cancel culture. But karma works in mysterious ways. Julian's family was thrown into a panicked crisis. Julian himself received death threats in his corporate email. Several times, he was so overwhelmed he tried to run out of the house to save Serena, but his parents physically blocked the door. Julian blamed everything entirely on me. Why did you do this? Don't you know cancel culture drives people to suicide? Yes, I thought about having you be a surrogate at first, but I didn't go through with it. Since we got married, I've bought you everything you wanted. Why are you trying to murder Serena and me? Seeing the veins bulge in his neck, I felt like I was looking at a complete stranger. For the entire time I had known him, even if it was just an act, he had always been calm and gentle. I had never seen him look so demonic. I calmly told him I did not upload the video, but he refused to believe me. Even my parents-in-law, who had previously felt guilty toward me, turned completely cold. They were exhausted by the media harassment and blamed me for ruining their peaceful retirement. Fortunately, my mom moved in to stay by my side, or I might have suffered a nervous breakdown. Things soon spiraled completely out of control. Serena attempted suicide. When Julian heard the news, he didn't even put his shoes on properly before violently shoving past his father and running out to his car. Of course, Serena's attempt failed. She had climbed up to the railing of her 18th floor high-rise balcony, but conveniently waited just long enough for Julian to speed across town and arrive. The second she saw him, she climbed right back down and collapsed into his arms, wailing that he was all she had left and that if he abandoned her, she would jump for real. Julian wrapped his suit jacket tightly around her fragile shoulders, and they walked away holding each other tightly. I arrived at the scene just in time to watch them leave. It truly felt like I was watching the dramatic climax of a romance movie, and I was just an extra on the set. I realized then that Serena had finally successfully forced reality to match her fictional novels. It was utterly exhausting. If they loved each other that pathologically, they could have each other. In the beginning of my marriage, I wanted a lot of love. Now, I just wanted a lot of money. I returned home and immediately agreed to the divorce. I demanded full custody of the twins, the suburban house, and a massive chunk of his liquid assets. Julian had his lawyers draft the papers overnight and immediately moved all his belongings out of the house. We had planned to file the papers quietly, but because Julian needed his original birth certificate and family trust documents from his parents' safe, Robert and Susan found out. They were violently opposed to the divorce. I told Julian I couldn't care less how he managed his parents. He just needed to bring me the finalized papers to sign. After that, I focused entirely on my own life. Between the trauma, the birth, and the scandal, I had barely had a moment to breathe. With the night nurses gone, my mom and I took over full-time care of the twins. Becoming a mother changed my brain chemistry. I realized all the time I had wasted fighting with a cheating loser could have been spent staring at my beautiful babies. As long as my bank account was full, the presence of a man was completely irrelevant. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, Susan called me, sobbing hysterically. She said Robert was in the emergency room. I left the babies with my mom and rushed to Chicago Med, only to learn Robert had suffered a massive heart attack induced by severe stress. It turned out Julian had been fighting a brutal Cold War with his parents to get his documents. Serena, playing the strategist, had convinced Julian to just bring her directly to the Hayes family home to beg for their blessing in person. Robert was already disgusted by the sight of Julian, but Serena kept crying and trying to deliver a sentimental speech about true love. When Robert told her to get the hell out of his house, Julian dropped an ultimatum. If his parents didn't accept Serena, he was legally changing his last name, cutting all ties, and they could pretend their son had died. Julian had been Robert's ultimate pride and joy, an Ivy League graduate, a corporate success, the perfect son. Robert believed Serena was a literal witch who had brainwashed his boy. Furious, the old man grabbed a heavy brass fireplace poker, threatening to chase Serena out. Julian stood between them, shielding her, and screamed his ultimatum. If they didn't accept Serena, he was cutting all ties. The vicious shouting match, combined with the immense stress from the public scandal, was too much for Robert. He suddenly went pale, clutched his chest, and collapsed to the floor. When I arrived at the hospital, Robert was already in emergency surgery. Tragically, he never woke up. The surgical team pronounced him dead an hour later. Susan collapsed in the waiting room, screaming until her vocal cords gave out. Standing in the corner, I felt a deep, genuine sorrow. Robert was a strict elitist man, but he had treated me with genuine respect. When I was pregnant, he had gone out of his way to drive out to organic farms in the country to buy the best produce and fresh poultry to ensure I was eating well. Down the hall, Julian was on his knees, weeping in agonizing grief. Susan crawled over to him and began wildly punching and scratching his face. Serena tried to intervene to protect him, but Julian suddenly snapped. He grabbed Serena by the shoulders and forcefully hurled her onto the linoleum floor. He screamed at her with blood-curdling rage. "This is all your fault! You forced me to bring you there! You killed my father!" Serena sat on the floor, staring at Julian in absolute horror, completely unable to process why the man who had just sacrificed everything for her was suddenly treating her like a murderer. These two soulmates, who had supposedly defied the world for their epic love, were now shattered. With the corpse of Julian's father lying between them, there was no universe where they could ever live happily ever after. After Robert's funeral, Susan aged 20 years overnight. She and Robert had been married for 40 years, and they deeply loved each other. The grief completely broke her brain. She started wandering around the empty mansion, calling out for Robert, forgetting he had died. I took her to a neurologist, who diagnosed her with rapidly progressing, trauma-induced Alzheimer's. Unable to leave her alone, I moved her into my house. It was incredibly depressing to witness. It was clear Robert's death had completely destroyed her reality. She had good days and bad days. On one of her lucid days, she walked into my home office with a stack of legal documents. She told me she was transferring the entire Hayes family estate, the trust funds, and her personal properties directly into the names of my twins. She stated coldly that the moment Julian shoved his father to the floor, her son had died. She swore she would not let that homewrecker see a single penny of the Hayes family fortune. When Julian was informed of the estate transfer, he stayed silent for a long time. Later that evening, when he dropped off the finalized divorce papers, I saw tears silently rolling down his cheeks. I had no idea if he was mourning his father, his inheritance, or the catastrophic ruin of his life. Serena tried to visit Julian a few times after the funeral, but he locked himself in his apartment and refused to open the door. She stood in the hallway crying and screaming, but he just sat inside the dark room staring at the wall. Eventually, Julian did open the door. They spoke for hours. No one knows what was said, but the next day, Julian looked entirely different, hollowed out and detached from reality. He called me and said he knew he had committed unforgivable sins and that nothing could ever fix what he broke. To atone, he signed away every last dollar of his remaining personal savings, stock portfolios, and $401k to me. He chose to walk away with absolutely nothing. When I officially received the divorce decree in the mail, it felt surreal. I vividly remembered Julian looking me dead in the eyes that afternoon and saying, "I failed as a father, and I failed as a son. If I could rewind time, I would never have made those choices." At the time, I brushed it off, thinking he was just being melodramatic. The very next morning, the Chicago Police Department called my phone. Julian and Serena had been in a catastrophic head-on collision on the highway. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. After a brief investigation, the police concluded the crash was the result of extremely reckless driving at a high speed. An autopsy revealed alcohol in Julian's system. It was unclear if it was an accident born from a final, explosive argument or something more deliberate. The ambiguity of their end felt strangely fitting for the chaos they had created. The guilt of killing his father had clearly tortured him to the point of insanity, leading him to choose the most extreme method to end his and Serena's story. When Susan heard the news, she fainted. When she woke up, her Alzheimer's had progressed severely, leaving her entirely trapped in her own mind. With 2 infants and a severely ill mother-in-law, I had my hands full. I used the immense wealth Julian and his family had left behind to hire a full-time live-in medical caregiver for Susan. Since she had given my children an empire, the least I could do was ensure she spent her final years in comfort and dignity. From the day I met Julian, to our wedding, to the birth of my children, it had only been about 3 years, but I felt like I had lived an entire lifetime. Now, the storm was over. I planned to move my mother into the house to live with us permanently. I have the rest of my life ahead of me, armed with absolute financial freedom. My only focus now is raising Miles and Hazel, teaching them right from wrong, and watching them grow into strong, independent adults under the bright sun.